The wind screamed across the frozen plain of Stiklestad as if the land itself were mourning, carrying with it the stench of blood, iron, and broken oaths. Harald Sigurdsson lay half-buried among the dead, his young body trembling from pain and cold, his breath coming in shallow gasps that fogged the air before his face. He was only 15, yet the battlefield had aged him decades in a single day. Around him lay shattered shields split by axes, spears snapped like twigs, and bodies twisted in unnatural silence. Friends and enemies alike indistinguishable beneath mud and gore. Only hours earlier, Harald had stood beside his half-brother, King Olaf II, fighting not just for a crown, but for faith, honor, and the soul of Norway itself. He had watched Olaf charge forward with fearless resolve, his banner cutting through smoke and chaos, until the moment steel found flesh and the king fell beneath a storm of blows. That image burned into Harald's mind, searing deeper than any wound. When the battle turned and Olaf's army collapsed, Harald fought like a cornered wolf, driven by instinct and fury far greater than his years, until a blade cut him down and the world dissolved into darkness. Now, as consciousness slowly returned, he realized death had passed him by, but not without claiming its price. His leg throbbed where bone met torn muscle. His side burned where a sword had kissed too deeply, and each breath stabbed his chest like ice. Ravens circled overhead, their cries sharp and impatient, already arguing over who would feast first. Harald forced his eyes open, staring at the gray sky above him. And in that moment, something hardened inside his soul. He had survived when kings had fallen. Fate, cruel and selective, had spared him for a reason. Loyal men found him before night, fully claimed the field, dragging his bleeding body away from the corpses, carrying him through forests and across frozen streams as enemy patrols scoured the land. Each mile of escape carved itself into Harald's memory, the pain forging his will into something unbreakable. In hidden huts and peasant homes, he lay feverish and delirious, whispering vows to gods old and new, swearing that exile would not be his end but his beginning. Norway had rejected him, but the world was wide, and Harald intended to conquer it piece by piece. When he could finally stand, he fled eastward, crossing borders that meant nothing to a man who had lost everything. He arrived in the lands of Kievan Rus not as a prince, but as a warrior for hire, selling his blade to survive. There, amid endless wars and shifting alliances, Harald learned the true cost of power. He fought in bitter winters and scorching summers, against mounted warriors and hardened infantry, absorbing every lesson the battlefield offered. Gold filled his hands, scars marked his body, and his name slowly gained weight among mercenary ranks. Yet no matter how much silver he earned, it was never enough. Harald hungered for something greater than comfort. He hungered for legend. That hunger drove him south, beyond familiar forests and rivers, toward stories whispered in awe. Constantinople, the city of the world's desire. When he finally saw its walls rise from the horizon, taller and stronger than anything he had imagined, Harald understood that his life had entered a new chapter. He joined the Varangian Guard, an elite brotherhood of northern warriors sworn to the Byzantine Emperor, and there the raw Viking learned discipline without losing ferocity. He marched beneath golden domes and through marble halls, yet spilled blood in distant lands, fighting pirates along sun-scorched coasts, crushing rebellions in Asia Minor, battling enemies whose languages he did not understand but whose deaths he witnessed up close. Each campaign sharpened him further, blending Norse brutality with imperial strategy. Harald became feared not just for his strength, but for his calm amid chaos, his willingness to advance when others faltered. Wealth flowed to him in chests heavy enough to bend ship decks, but with power came danger. Court politics slithered like serpents through Constantinople, and Harald, too successful and too independent, became a threat. Accused of treason, He was thrown into a dark prison cell, stripped of rank and freedom, surrounded by stone and silence. Many men would have broken there, crushed beneath betrayal and despair, but Harald did not. He waited, watched, and planned. When the moment came, he escaped with ruthless precision, reclaiming his fortune and slipping into the night like a shadow. As a ship sailed away from the glittering city, carrying him back toward the cold north, Harald Sigurdsson was no longer the wounded boy left for dead at Stiklestad. He was a seasoned warrior shaped by exile, battle, betrayal, and survival, a man who had stared into the heart of empires and lived. And as the waves carried him home, one truth burned brighter than ever within him. He would return not as a servant, not as a fugitive, but as a king forged by blood and destiny. Harald Sigurdsson returned to Scandinavia not as a wandering exile, but as a man carved from iron and experience, his ships riding low in the water beneath the weight of gold, weapons, and reputation. Word of his arrival spread faster than the winter wind, whispered in long houses and feared in royal courts, because this was no longer the boy who had fled after Stiklestad. This was a warrior who had survived empires. When Harald claimed the Norwegian throne, he did so with a cold certainty that left little room for doubt or mercy. He ruled as Harald Hardrada, the hard ruler, a name earned through action rather than ceremony, and he believed with unshakable conviction that a king's strength must be felt before it could ever be admired. His presence alone commanded silence, his towering frame and scarred face a living reminder of the cost of defiance. Rebellions that flared against his authority were extinguished swiftly, not with reckless cruelty, but with calculated brutality meant to teach lessons that would linger for generations. Harald understood fear as a language, and he spoke it fluently, making examples of those who tested his rule so that others would never need to. Laws were enforced with the edge of the sword, taxes collected with relentless efficiency, an order imposed upon a land long fractured by rival ambitions. Norway grew stronger under his grip, unified not by love, but by inevitability, and though many cursed his name in private, none could deny the stability he forged through force of will. Yet even as he sat upon the throne, clad in authority and wealth, restlessness gnawed at him like a persistent wound. Harald was not built for stillness. The fire that had carried him across continents and through prison walls could not be satisfied by a single crown. His gaze turned outward, toward Denmark, toward the sea, toward the idea that power, once tasted, must be expanded or it would rot. Claiming the Danish throne as his right, Harald unleashed relentless campaigns that shook coastlines and drowned the waves in blood. Fleets clashed beneath storm-darkened skies, or splintered, shields locked, and men screamed as fire and steel consumed them. In battle, Harald was transformed, moving with terrifying focus, wielding his massive axe as if it were an extension of his own body, cutting down enemies with a calm precision that bordered on the inhuman. Stories followed him like smoke, tales of impossible strength, of a king who fought in the front ranks rather than hiding behind walls, of a ruler who laughed when arrows fell around him and mocked death to its face. Some called him fearless. Others whispered that he was touched by madness. Harald did not care. He believed deeply that destiny favored the bold, and that hesitation was the only true weakness. As years passed and victories piled upon victories, his confidence hardened into something more dangerous, certainty. He spoke of fate as if it were a companion that walked beside him, guiding his steps, choosing him above lesser men. The old Viking blood pulsed stronger with every campaign, awakening visions of greatness that stretched beyond Scandinavia's shores. To Harald, conquest was not mere ambition. It was proof of worth, confirmation that the gods had not spared him at Stiklestad by chance. England began to loom in his thoughts, rich and divided, a land once touched by Viking rule and ripe for reclamation. The idea took root and grew until it consumed him, blending memory, prophecy, and pride into a single irresistible call. Though age had begun to silver his hair, his strength remained formidable, and his hunger for glory burned brighter than that of men half his years. He spoke of England as the final test, the ultimate prize that would seal his legacy and elevate his name beyond time. Those who followed him felt the weight of history pressing forward, sensing that they marched not just toward another war, but toward the closing of an age. Harold gathered ships, warriors, and supplies with relentless determination, forging one of the last great Viking fleets the world would ever see. To his men, he was more than a king. He was a living saga, a reminder of what it meant to be fearless in a world growing increasingly cautious. Yet beneath the confidence and thunderous ambition lay a dangerous truth. Harald Hardrada no longer questioned whether he could be defeated. He had survived exile, betrayal, imprisonment, and endless war, and in his mind, that survival had become proof of invincibility. The hard ruler stood at the peak of his power, convinced that destiny itself bent to his will, unaware that the same certainty that had carried him so far was now guiding him toward a final, unforgiving reckoning. The English sky hung low and pale above Stamford Bridge, heavy with the stillness that comes just before fate reveals its hand, as Harald Hardrada stood among his men with the calm confidence of a warrior who believed the world had already bent to his will. The Viking army rested in the late summer air, armor loosened, helmets set aside, laughter and idle boasts drifting across the riverbanks after the triumph at Fulford, where victory had seemed to confirm every belief Harold held about his own destiny. He did not wear his armor that day, trusting speed and strength over caution, convinced that no force in England could reach him so quickly or challenge him so suddenly. The river glimmered beneath the bridge, deceptively peaceful, while banners fluttered lazily in the breeze, unaware that history was about to close its grip. When word came that the English king's army was approaching, disbelief rippled through the Viking ranks like a sudden chill. But Harold did not hesitate. He rose to his full towering height, his massive two-handed axe in hand, his presence alone steadying men whose confidence began to waver. The enemy appeared in disciplined lines, shields locked, advancing with purpose, and in that moment the battlefield transformed from resting ground to killing field. Harold charged forward, fearless and exposed, a living embodiment of the old Viking spirit that had once terrorized coastlines and shattered kingdoms. He fought at the front, carving a path through English warriors, each swing of his axe fueled by decades of battle and belief, his voice rising above the clash of steel as he urges men to stand firm. Arrows darkened the air, shields splintered, and bodies fell into the river below, turning its waters red. Yet Harold pressed on, seemingly untouched by fear or doubt. For a brief, violent moment, it seemed as though sheer will might bend reality itself, as if the old gods still watched and favored their chosen champion. But fate is indifferent to legend. Amid the chaos, an arrow flew true, slicing through the noise and striking Harold in the throat, a single silent sentence spoken by destiny. The giant staggered, his grip loosening, the force that had driven him across continents draining away in seconds. As he fell, the battlefield seemed to pause, the Viking king collapsing not with a roar, but with the heavy finality of something ending forever. His men surged forward in desperation and rage, fighting on in his name, but the truth had already settled like a shadow over the field. Without Harold, the invincibility shattered. The battle raged on, brutal and unforgiving, but the outcome was sealed. Viking ranks thinned, hope bled away, and survival replaced conquest as the final objective. When the fighting ended, the cost was written across the ground in broken bodies and shattered dreams. Of the vast fleet that had carried the invasion across the sea, only a fraction of ships were needed to carry the survivors home, their sails heavy with grief rather than glory. Harald Hardrada lay among the fallen, his life's journey complete. A warrior who had risen from a wounded boy left for dead to a king who had challenged empires and kings alike. His death echoed far beyond Stamford Bridge, signaling more than the fall of a single ruler. It marked the end of the Viking Age itself, the final breath of a world defined by fearless raids, axe-wielding kings, and men who believed the horizon existed only to be crossed. Soon after, another invasion would reshape England, but it would belong to a different age, one of castles and crowns rather than longships and sagas. Harold's story faded into legend, carried not by surviving warriors but by memory and myth. He died as he had lived, unarmored, defiant, and at the center of battle. His life a relentless pursuit of destiny that refused to bow to time or reason. In the silence left behind, the world moved on, but the shadow of the last great Viking king lingered, a reminder of an age when men believed greatness was taken by force and sealed in blood. Harald Hardrada did not merely witness the end of the Viking era. He embodied it, and with his fall, the old world closed its eyes for the final time.